The Eternal Throne drifted powerless through the debris field that had once been the greatest fleet in galactic history. Its engines cold, and its weapons silent, Emperor Vale Therian Ix sat alone in the darkness of his bridge, surrounded by dead screens and empty chairs. For his guards had fled, and his advisors had abandoned him when the true scale of the defeat became clear. Had ruled for 9,000 years, and in all that time he had never known what it felt like to lose. To be helpless. To watch everything he had built crumble into dust. Now he sat and waited for the humans to come and end his dynasty. The door opened, and light spilled into the darkened. Bridge Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo walked in, accompanied by Commander Sarah Chun and a small group of human soldiers, their weapons holstered. Their faces calm, the Emperor looked up at them with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Eyes that now held nothing but tired confusion. "You have come to kill me," he said. And it was not a question. Okonkwo shook his head and pulled up a chair, sitting down across from the ancient ruler, as if they were meeting for tea, rather than in the aftermath of the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen. "We are not here to kill you," he said quietly. "We never wanted to kill anyone." The Emperor stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. "Then what do you want?" "Our surrender, our territory, our technology. We want you to understand something," Okonkwo replied. "Something that your empire never learned in 12,000 years of conquest." He leaned forward, his old soldier's eyes meeting the Emperor's ancient gaze. "Humanity grew up on a world that tried to kill us. Every single day. We had predators that hunted us, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, natural disasters that struck without warning, and most dangerous of all, we had each other." Chun stepped forward and continued where Okonkwo paused. "We survived because we learned to cooperate, to build communities, to work together against threats that none of us could face alone. We fought countless wars among ourselves, but we also built hospitals and schools and systems of government that tried to protect the weak from the strong. Your empire learned a different lesson," Okonkwo said. "You learned that the strong take what they want and the weak submit or die. You conquered species by overwhelming force, and you never gave them a reason to believe they could win against you." He gestured at the devastation visible through the viewport, the shattered hulks of Valorian warships drifting among the stars. "But fear is a fragile foundation. The moment your subjects believed they could resist, they did, not because we told them to, but because they had been waiting for that chance for thousands of years." The Emperor's voice was hollow when he spoke. "You have destroyed everything I built." "No," Okonkwo replied gently. "We gave everyone a chance to build something better, including your own people." He stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the aftermath of the battle. "The war is over, Emperor. You can spend the rest of your long life trying to rebuild your empire through force, and maybe you will succeed for a time. But eventually, the same thing will happen again, because empires built on fear always fall." He turned back to face the defeated ruler. "Or you can choose a different path. The Valorian people have much to offer the galaxy. Your technology, your knowledge, your thousands of years of history. You could become partners with the other species instead of their masters." The Emperor laughed bitterly. "You speak of partnership after killing millions of my soldiers. We killed fewer than 50,000, Chun said quietly, "in a fleet of 5 million. We disabled ships rather than destroying them. We targeted engines and weapons rather than crew quarters. We captured rather than killed wherever possible." She met the Emperor's shocked gaze steadily. "Humanity knows how to destroy. We have been doing it for 10,000 years. But we have also learned that destruction alone solves nothing. You cannot build a future on corpses. You cannot create peace through annihilation." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, processing the fact that the species he had tried to exterminate had gone to extraordinary lengths to spare his people. "Why?" he finally asked. Why show mercy to those who showed you none? Okonkwo smiled sadly. Because we want a galaxy worth living in. Not a galaxy of ashes. Because the children of your soldiers deserve to grow up in a universe where war is not the only answer. Because hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it as surely as it destroys the enemy. He extended his hand to the ancient emperor in the same gesture he had offered to Tethmakar. The war is over. What comes next is up to you. Valtharian Ix looked at the offered hand for a very long time. He thought about his empire. Crumbling across the Orion Spur as vassal species threw off their chains, he thought about his fleet. Destroyed by a species that had not existed when his dynasty began, he thought about all the worlds he had conquered, all the cultures he had erased, all the futures he had stolen, and he thought about what it might mean to build something different. Something that did not require the submission of others to sustain itself, slowly. Hesitantly, he reached out and took the human's hand. 50 years later, the Galactic Council met in the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of New Geneva. Representatives from 300 species gathered to discuss the future they were building together. The Valorian delegate sat among them as an equal. Her people's empire dissolved into a democratic federation that worked alongside its former subjects. Rather than above them, at the center of the council sat the human delegation. Not as rulers, but as mediators. A species that had earned the galaxy's respect, not through conquest, but through the simple, stubborn belief that every thinking being deserved freedom. Ambassador Sarah Chun, now gray-haired and lined with age, but still quick to smile, was asked by a young Valorian journalist how humanity had found the courage to challenge an empire that had ruled for 12,000 years. She laughed softly at the question. Courage is not the absence of fear, she said. Courage is being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. We were not brave. We were desperate. But we decided that we would rather die fighting for our freedom than live as slaves. The journalist tilted her head curiously. And if you had lost, Chun's smile faded into something more thoughtful. Then, we would have lost fighting for something that mattered. There are worse fates than dying for a cause worth dying for. She looked out at the assembly hall, at the hundreds of free species working together, building alliances, solving problems, creating a future that none of them could have achieved alone. Much worse fates than that. The council session continued. Debates and discussions and the slow, difficult work of building cooperation among beings who had once been enemies. Outside, the great windows, the stars shone bright and eternal, witnesses to the endless story of life reaching for the heavens, and somewhere among those stars, on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow sun, the children of humanity looked up at the night sky and dreamed of adventures yet to come. They were no longer alone in the universe, but then again, they never really had been. The battle lasted 6 hours, but it was not truly a battle because a battle implies that both sides have some chance of victory. And the Valorian fleet never had any chance at all. Commander Sarah Chun commanded the human forces from her cruiser the Relentless, and she watched her tactical display with grim satisfaction as squadron after squadron of enemy ships went dark. The Terran fleet moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Ships blinking in and out of normal space so quickly that Valorian targeting computers could not track them, appearing inside enemy shield perimeters to deliver devastating strikes. Before vanishing again, human pilots had trained for this moment their entire lives, practicing maneuvers that exploited every weakness in Valorian doctrine. And they executed their attacks with a precision that bordered on artistry. But the most remarkable thing about the battle was what the humans were not doing. They were not killing. Chun had given strict orders, and every captain in the fleet understood the mission. For this was not about destruction, but about sending a message. Human weapons, targeted engines and weapon systems and shield generators, while carefully avoiding crew sections and life support. And when a Valorian ship was disabled, the humans moved on to the next target rather than finishing it off. Enemy flagship is attempting to rally their remaining combat-capable vessels, reported Lieutenant Park from the sensor. Station Chen nodded and studied the display. For Vice Admiral Tethmakar was trying to organize a counterattack with the few hundred ships that still had functioning weapons. It was a brave attempt, but ultimately futile. Have the 4th through 12th squadrons execute Maneuver Sigma 7, Chun ordered. Disable those ships, but keep casualties to a minimum. The human squadron swept in like wolves among sheep, their ships dancing through enemy fire with casual ease. And within 20 minutes, the counterattack was over. Across the battlefield, the wreckage of the 7th Subjugation Fleet drifted in helpless silence. 10,000 warships reduced to floating hulks, without a single one destroyed. Completely 900,000 Valorian crew members sat in their crippled vessels, alive and unharmed, but unable to fight or flee. Chun opened a channel to Fleet Admiral Okonkwo back on Earth. Admiral, the enemy fleet is neutralized, she reported. No human casualties. Enemy casualties estimated at less than 2,000. Mostly from accidents and system failures rather than our weapons. Okonkwo's weathered face appeared on her screen, and he allowed himself a small smile of relief. Well done, Commander. Now comes the hard part. Chun understood what he meant. For winning the battle was only the beginning. What mattered now was what they did with their victory. She maneuvered her ship toward the crippled Valorian flagship where Vice Admiral Tethmakar waited in the darkness of his dead bridge, surrounded by officers who had never known defeat until today. This is Commander Chen to Valorian Command, she broadcast. Your fleet is disabled, but your crews are alive. We are going to keep them that way. We are not your enemies unless you force us to be. There was a long silence before Tethmakar's voice came through the speakers, broken and hollow. Why? He asked. Why spare us? Your weapons could have destroyed every ship. Why show mercy to those who came to enslave you? It was a good question, and Chun considered her answer carefully, because killing you accomplishes nothing, she said. Dead soldiers cannot carry messages, and we need you to deliver a message to your emperor. She paused to let that sink in. Humanity does not want war with the Valorian Empire. We want to be left alone to live our lives and explore the stars in peace. But if your emperor insists on conquest, then we will defend ourselves. You cannot win, Tethmakar said. Though his voice held no conviction, the Empire has millions of ships, entire sectors of industrial capacity dedicated to war. You may have won today, but you cannot defeat us forever. Chun smiled sadly. Admiral, we have been fighting wars since before your empire existed. We have survived ice ages and plagues and nuclear weapons pointed at our own cities. We have spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other in increasingly creative ways. She gestured at the battlefield around them. Your empire conquers species that give up. You have never truly had to fight because everyone surrenders before the real fighting begins. But humans do not surrender. We dig in and we endure, and we find ways to win no matter how long it takes. Her voice hardened. Tell your emperor what happened here. Tell him that his fleet was defeated without being able to land a single effective shot. Tell him that we showed mercy today, but we will not show it forever. The human fleet began the long process of herding the disabled Valorian ships into a cluster near Saturn's rings, moving the helpless vessels with tractor beams and careful nudges from their own hulls. It took 12 hours, but when it was done, the entire 7th Subjugation Fleet floated together in a great mass, surrounded by human warships that watched them with patient vigilance. Admiral Okonkwo arrived aboard his command ship, the Indomitable, and he came to the Valorian flagship in person. Walking through the dark corridors with only Commander Chun and a small security detail, they found Tethmakar sitting alone on his bridge. His officers dismissed. His guards fled, waiting for whatever would come next. Vice Admiral Okonkwo said, his voice gentle despite everything. I am Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo of the Terran Confederacy. Tethmakar looked up at the human with eyes that had aged 100 years in a single day. You come to gloat, he said flatly. No. Okonkwo replied, I come to explain. He sat down across from the defeated admiral, meeting his gaze without anger or triumph. Your empire has ruled through fear for 12,000 years. You crush any species that might challenge you before they become strong enough to fight back. It is an effective strategy, but it has a fatal flaw. And what is that? Tethmakar asked. You never learned to fight anyone who was not afraid, Okonkwo said simply. Your tactics assume the enemy will panic. Your weapons are designed to intimidate rather than to overcome real resistance. Your officers are trained to accept surrender rather than to earn victory. He leaned forward. Humanity learned to fight in a different school. We learned against enemies who would never surrender. Against diseases that could not be intimidated. Against a universe that did not care if we lived or died. We survived because we refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. Tethmakar was silent for a long moment. The Emperor will not accept this defeat. He finally said, he will send the Grand Armada, every ship in the Empire. He will burn your worlds to ash and salt the ground where your species once stood. Okonkwo nodded slowly. We know, and when he does, we will be ready. He stood and offered his hand to the defeated admiral in a gesture that Tethmakar did not understand. Go home. Vice Admiral, tell your emperor what you saw here. And tell him that he has a choice. He can leave humanity in peace, and we will leave the empire in peace. Or he can continue this war and learn what it truly means to fight a species that will never surrender. Tethmakar stared at the offered hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. You are either the bravest species in the galaxy, he said quietly, or the most foolish. Okonkwo smiled. We have been asking ourselves that question for 10,000 years, and we still do not know the answer. When the survivors of the 7th Subjugation Fleet limped home to Vela Prime with their report of defeat, the Imperial Palace fell into chaos unlike anything it had seen in 3,000 years. Emperor Veltharion IX listened to Vice Admiral Tethmakar's account in complete silence, his ancient face revealing nothing as the disgraced officer described the impossible technology and the devastating precision of the human fleet. When Tethmakar finished speaking, the Emperor remained motionless for a long moment. Then he erupted. His rage echoed through the great throne room as he screamed orders and condemnations, demanding the execution of every officer who had survived the battle, declaring humanity an abomination that must be erased from existence. Vowing to personally oversee the destruction of their world, the court watched in terrified silence as their immortal ruler lost control for the first time in living memory. Summon the Grand Armada, Veltharion commanded when his fury had cooled to something harder and more dangerous. Every warship in the Empire, every planet cracker, every weapon we possess. I want 5 million ships assembled at the staging grounds within 3 months. His advisors exchanged nervous glances, for the Grand Armada had not been assembled in 8,000 years. Not since the conquest of the Vorthan hegemony, when the Empire had faced its last serious challenge. Majesty, ventured Grand Vizier Kelmuth. Perhaps diplomacy might achieve better results. The humans offered peace. Perhaps we could negotiate. The Emperor's eyes blazed with cold fire. Negotiate. With insects who dared to challenge our supremacy. With primitives who humiliated the greatest military force in the galaxy. He rose from his throne, an ancient figure who had ruled for 9,000 years and had forgotten what it meant to be defied. We do not negotiate with vermin. We exterminate them, and when the Grand Armada reaches their pitiful little star system, We will leave nothing behind but ash and silence. The orders went out across the Empire, and the greatest mobilization in galactic history began. From 1,000 worlds came warships of every size and type. From the smallest patrol craft to the massive dreadnoughts that served as mobile fortresses. From the sleek interceptors of the hunting fleets to the terrifying planet crackers that could shatter worlds with a single shot. 5 million ships gathered at the staging grounds, blotting out the stars themselves with their numbers. A force so vast that the light from their engines could be seen from neighboring star systems, and the vassal species of the Empire watched with a mixture of fear and something else. Something they had not felt in centuries, hope for 12,000 years. The conquered peoples of the Orion Spur had lived under the Emperor's heel, their spirits broken by the certainty that resistance was futile. Their cultures erased and replaced with Valorian obedience, but now a small young species from an unremarkable star had proven that the Empire could be challenged, that its fleets could be defeated, that the Emperor's power was not as absolute as everyone had believed on 100 worlds. In whispered conversations and encrypted messages, the seeds of rebellion began to take root. Humanity knew what was coming, and they prepared for it with the same patient determination that had guided them for 2 centuries. Fleet Admiral Okonkwo doubled production at every shipyard, called up every reserve pilot, deployed every defensive system that had been held in reserve. But he also did something else, something that would prove far more important than any military preparation. He broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. The transmission went out on every frequency, bypassing Valorian sensors through a network of hidden relay satellites that human agents had secretly placed throughout the Empire over the previous decades. President Elena Vasquez of the Terran Confederacy appeared on billions of screens across the Orion Spur, her face calm and her voice steady. To all the species living under Valorian rule, she said, "You are watching because your masters have told you that humanity will be destroyed. They want you to witness our end as a warning against resistance." She paused and smiled slightly. "Watch closely. Watch what happens when free people refuse to kneel. And when it is over, ask yourselves a question. If these humans could challenge the Empire with only 200 years of preparation, what could your people achieve if you refused to surrender your future?" The message spread like wildfire through the underground networks of every conquered world. Shared in secret, discussed in whispers, remembered by those who had long ago given up hope. 3 months later, the Grand Armada arrived at the edge of the Sol System. 5 million warships hung in space like a wall of death, their weapons charged, their crews eager for vengeance. Emperor Valtharion Ix watched from the bridge of his personal flagship, the Eternal Throne, a vessel the size of a small moon that served as the mobile heart of the Empire. "Begin the advance," he commanded. "Destroy everything. Leave nothing alive." The Armada moved forward and humanity broadcast again. Not a message of defiance or desperation, but a live feed of the battle that was about to begin, transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. "Watch," President Vasquez said simply. "Watch and remember, what the galaxy witnessed over the next 72 hours would become the stuff of legend. Stories passed down through generations, as proof that the impossible could become real." The human fleet was outnumbered 25-1, but they fought with a fury and creativity that the Valorians could not comprehend. Ships blinked across the battlefield in patterns too complex for any computer to predict, appearing and disappearing in clouds of displaced space, striking from impossible angles and vanishing before retaliation could arrive. Human pilots flew maneuvers that should have torn their vessels apart, pushed their ships beyond every safety limit, embraced risks that no sane military doctrine would allow, and they did not fight alone across the Empire. Watching the broadcast, the vassal species saw their masters dying, and something ancient and powerful began to stir in there. Artson Kethmer Prime. Workers seized control of the weapons factories and turned the guns on their Valorian overseers on Valoria. The underground resistance that had survived for 6,000 years finally emerged into the light and declared independence on a dozen other worlds. Populations that had been crushed and conquered rose up with nothing but their bare hands in their rage. The Emperor watched his grand armada crumble, and he could not understand how this was possible. How a species so young and so small could defeat the greatest military force in galactic history. But what truly broke him was not the battle itself. It was watching his empire burn behind him as the slaves he had never considered a threat rose up and tore down. Everything he had built humanity had not just defeated his fleet. They had shown the galaxy that the Emperor had no clothes, that his power was an illusion maintained only by the belief that resistance was impossible, and now that belief was dead. Vice Admiral Tethmakar watched through the great viewport of his flagship as the 7th Subjugation Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, and he felt nothing but contempt for the species he had come to conquer. 10,000 warships spread out behind him in perfect formation, their weapons charged and their crews eager for the easy victory that awaited them. The human star was small and yellow and utterly unremarkable. Just another insignificant sun in an insignificant corner of the galaxy. And Tethmakar wondered why the Empire even bothered with such worthless territory, but orders were orders, and High Admiral Kethvorm wanted an example made. Begin broadcasting the surrender demand on all frequencies. Tethmakar commanded, settling into his chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His communications officer obeyed, and the message went out across the system, demanding immediate capitulation and promising destruction to any who resisted. They waited for several hours. Nothing happened, and Tethmakar grew impatient, for he had expected the humans to respond immediately with terrified pleas for mercy. Perhaps they are too primitive to receive our transmissions, suggested his tactical officer, a veteran named Korath, who had served in dozens of subjugation campaigns. Or perhaps they are simply slow to understand their situation. Tethmakar replied with a sneer. Move the fleet toward their inner planets. We will destroy one of their colonies to encourage cooperation. The fleet began its advance. They had traveled perhaps a quarter of the distance to the human homeworld when sensors detected a single vessel approaching from the direction of the 6th planet. A ringed gas giant that the humans apparently called Saturnet was laughably small, barely the size of a Valorian corvette, and it came alone toward the massive fleet without any apparent concern for its own survival. What is this? Tethmakar asked, genuinely confused by such strange behavior. Unknown vessel type, Korath reported, studying his sensor readings with growing puzzlement. Its energy signature is unlike anything in our database. The hull material is also unrecognized. A single ship against 10,000. Tethmakar laughed. These humans are either very brave or very stupid. The small vessel came to a stop several thousand kilometers from the Valorian formation and broadcast a message. The face that appeared on the view screen belonged to a human. Female with dark hair pulled back from her face and calm steady. Eyes that showed no trace of fear. And when she spoke, her voice carried a confidence that Tethmakar found deeply irritating. I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, she said, and I am here to offer you one chance to turn your fleet around and leave our system. The Valorian Empire does not understand what it is dealing with. You do not have to die today. The bridge crew burst into laughter at the absurdity of it. For here was a single tiny ship threatening the mightiest subjugation fleet in the sector. Human, Tethmakar said when he had composed himself. You have exactly 10 seconds to power down your vessel and prepare for boarding. Or we will reduce you to atoms, Commander. Chun smiled, and it was not the smile of someone afraid. I tried, she said simply. Tethmakar gestured to his tactical officer, and Korath gave the order. 47 warships in the nearest squadron opened fire simultaneously, unleashing enough energy to vaporize a small moon. The beams struck empty space. The human ship had simply vanished and reappeared 2 kilometers to the left, completely unharmed, as if the attack had never happened. Silence fell across the bridge as the Valorian officers stared at their screens in disbelief. Korath whispered, checking and rechecking his sensor readings. How did they do that? Commander Chun's face appeared on screen again, and she was still smiling that infuriating smile. We call it spatial displacement technology, she explained in the tone of a teacher addressing slow students. Your weapons cannot hit what is not there. We can move our ships anywhere within a radius of 10,000 kilometers instantaneously. Your targeting systems will never be able to track us. Tethmakar felt something cold growing in his stomach, something he had never experienced in all his years of easy conquests. It was fear. That was your one chance, Chun continued. Now it is our turn. The stars behind her ship began to shimmer, and Tethmakar watched in growing horror as the darkness of space came alive with light ships, human ships, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, appearing from nowhere as if space itself was giving birth to a fleet. They emerged from behind moons and asteroids, rose up from the rings of the great gas giant, materialized in flashes of displaced space all around the Valorian formation. 200,000 ships, Commander Chun said, each one equipped with spatial displacement drives and weapons your shields cannot stop. We have been preparing for this moment for 200 years. Tethmakar's tactical displays turned solid red with enemy contacts, and his sensor officers began shouting reports of impossible readings. For the human vessels were doing things that violated every law of physics. The Valorians understood. You told High Admiral Kethvorin that we had 200 ships, Chun said. We let you believe that. We wanted you to underestimate us. We wanted you to send a fleet small enough for us to defeat without too much destruction. This is impossible, Tethmakar managed to say. You are a young species. You cannot have technology like this. We are a young species, Chun agreed. But we have spent our entire history fighting. First we fought the predators on our world. Then we fought each other. We have had wars that lasted 100 years. Weapons that could destroy cities in an instant. Conflicts that killed millions. Her smile faded and her eyes grew hard. Your empire conquers species that surrender at the first sign of force. You have never fought anyone who truly knew how to fight back. You have never faced an enemy that refused to give up no matter the odds. She leaned forward. Welcome to humanity. Admiral, we do not surrender. We do not submit. And we have been waiting for you. The human fleet began to move. Tethmakar screamed orders to his crew, demanding evasive maneuvers and return fire and shield reinforcement. But his voice was drowned out by the sound of alarms as the first human weapon struck his flagship. The beams passed through his shields as if they did not exist, and tore into the hull with surgical precision, disabling weapons and engines while leaving life support intact. All around him, the 7th Subjugation Fleet died, not in a blaze of glory, but in confused, helpless chaos, as ships that could not be targeted destroyed them piece by piece. And through it all, Vice Admiral Tethmakar could only watch and realize that everything he knew about warfare was wrong. The Valorian Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever said no to them. High Admiral Kethvorin sat in his command chair aboard the massive warship, Eternal Dominion, and stared at the report on his screen with growing irritation. for his scouts had discovered something unexpected at the edge of explored space, a new species. They called themselves humans, and they came from a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, a place the Empire had never bothered to explore because the region held no valuable resources and seemed utterly worthless. But now these humans had built ships, and they were spreading outward from their home system like insects crawling from a nest. K'Varn tapped his long gray fingers against the armrest of his chair and considered the situation. For he had conquered 37 species in his long career, and he knew exactly how this would go. First, he would send the ultimatum. Then the humans would beg for mercy. Then they would submit to Valorian rule, and their world would become another jewel in the Emperor's crown. It was always the same. He dictated the message himself, using the standard words that had brought so many worlds to their knees. Attention, unknown species. You have been detected by the glorious Valorian Empire, rulers of the Orion Spur and masters of 3 spiral arms. You will immediately cease all expansion and prepare for integration into Imperial territory. Your leaders will present themselves for genetic cataloging and loyalty programming. Your military vessels will power down and await boarding. Failure to comply will result in the complete annihilation of your species. You have 1 standard cycle to respond. There will be no negotiation. He sent the message and leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. 3 days past the response arrived not as a groveling plea for mercy, but as a single word transmitted on open channel for anyone to hear. No. K'Varn stared at the message for a long moment, certain there must be some mistake, for no species had ever responded to the ultimatum with defiance, and surely these primitive humans did not understand what they were facing. He ordered his intelligence officers to compile everything they knew about humanity, and the report made him laugh out loud. These humans had only been traveling between stars for 500 years, barely a blink of an eye compared to the Empire's ancient history, and their entire fleet consisted of perhaps 200 ships, tiny vessels that would pose no threat to even a minor Valorian patrol group. The Empire commanded millions of warships, planet crackers that could shatter worlds, weapons that could extinguish stars, armies that numbered in the trillions, and these humans with their 200 ships had said no. K'Varn shared the report with his senior officers, and they all laughed together at the absurdity of it. For what could these insects possibly hope to achieve against the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known? They are simply ignorant, said Vice Admiral Tethmakar, a younger officer eager to prove himself. They do not understand what we are. Once they see our fleet, they will surrender immediately. K'Varn nodded in agreement and issued his orders. For the humans needed to learn their place, and they needed to learn it quickly. He dispatched the 7th Subjugation Fleet under Tethmakar's command, 10,000 warships that would descend upon the human homeworld and demonstrate the foolishness of resistance. Make an example of them, K'Varn told his subordinate. Destroy a few of their colonies first, so they understand we are serious. Then accept their surrender and begin the integration process. Tethmakar bowed deeply and departed to carry out his mission, eager for the glory that would come with bringing a new species into the fold. As the fleet prepared to depart, K'Varn filed his report to the Imperial Palace on the throne world of Valor Prime, informing Emperor Zale Thalion IX that a minor new species had been discovered and would be subjugated. Within the month, he did not give the matter much thought after that, for the conquest of primitive species was routine work and hardly worthy of his attention. What K'Varn did not know, and could not have known, was that humanity had been watching the Empire for a very long time. 2 centuries earlier, a human deep space probe had detected Valorian transmissions, and the governments of Earth had made a decision that would shape the future of their species. They would prepare quietly. Secretly, humanity had studied the Empire and learned everything they could about its tactics, its technology, its strengths and weaknesses. And they had used that knowledge to build something the galaxy had never seen. The public fleet of 200 ships was a mask, a deception designed to make humanity appear weak and unthreatening. But behind that mask lay the true Terran Defense Force 200,000 warships hidden in the asteroid belts and the moons of the outer planets, each one equipped with technology that humanity had developed specifically to counter Valerian weapon spatial displacement drives that could move a ship across thousands of kilometers in an instant. Shields that operated on principles the Empire had never discovered. Weapons that could bypass any armor the Valorians possessed. Humanity had learned from watching the Empire's conquests that the Valerians always won because their enemies always fought fair, always followed the rules of engagement that the Empire had established, always tried to meet force with force. Humans did not intend to fight fair on Earth. In the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo studied them reports of the approaching Valorian fleet and allowed himself a small smile. He was an old soldier who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, and now that it had finally arrived, he felt strangely calm. "They are sending 10,000 ships," reported his aide, Commander Sarah Chun, a brilliant tactician who had designed many of the strategies they would use. "Standard subjugation formation, no escorts, no reserve force. They think we are helpless," Okonkwo said quietly. "They think this will be easy. Should we try to negotiate?" asked Chun. Though her tone made clear, she already knew the answer. "The Empire does not negotiate," Okonkwo replied. "They demand submission or they destroy. There is no middle ground with them. We learned that from watching what they did to the Kethmari and the Valorian Confederacy and all the others." He stood and walked to the great window that overlooked the command center, where thousands of officers worked at their stations, coordinating the defense of humanity. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Tell them to maintain concealment until my order. Let the Valorians come. Let them think they have won. And then we will show them what humanity is made of." Chun nodded and began transmitting the orders across the solar system. Hidden in the shadows of moons and buried in asteroid fields, the true fleet of humanity waited in perfect silence. They had prepared for this moment for 200 years. They were ready.